The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. It clung to the city like a curse, soaking brick and sidewalk, turning alleys into rivers of filth and flickering reflections. In one such alley, narrow, forgotten, wedged between a shuttered bakery and a crumbling apartment, a figure moved without sound. He did not belong to the rain. He belonged to a kingdom. The vampire paused beneath a broken fire escape, tilting his head slightly. To anyone watching, he would have looked like a normal human being listening to his surroundings. But what he heard was far beyond human. Heartbeats through walls, blood humming through veins, the distant pulse of life echoing like music in the dark. And then, something strange, not the steady rhythm of an adult, not the frantic stutter of prey, a flutter, small, weak, persistent, delicate. He followed it. Near a dented trash bin, half hidden beneath a soaked bundle of blankets, the sound grew clearer. The vampire crouched, his movements deliberate, almost wary. The scent reached him next. Milk, warmth, and something impossibly fragile. He pulled back the blanket. A baby. Its face was scrunched in discomfort rather than fear, tiny fists waving weakly at the cold. Rain had already seeped through the fabric, dampening its clothes. Its heartbeat fluttered unevenly, like a candle on the verge of going out. The vampire recoiled, not in disgust, but in confusion. This was not prey. This was unfinished, untouched by the weight of years, untouched by the darkness the world carries. The child made a soft, broken cry. Something inside him, something he thought was long dead, shifted. He looked up, scanning the alley. No footsteps, no lingering scent of a parent. Whoever had left the child here had done so deliberately, or desperately. The rain continued to fall. "You will die if I don't take you," he murmured.
Barely
softly.
more than the whisper of wind. Not a threat, a fact. The baby's hand reached out blindly, brushing against his cold fingers. He froze. No human ever reached for him. Not like that. The tiny fingers curled around his own, and for a brief moment, the vampire felt something impossible warmth. Not in his body, but somewhere deeper. Somewhere he had buried beneath centuries of hunger and silence. A memory flickered. A life before Fangs. Before endless sleepless nights. Before he had stopped caring, the baby whimpered again. Weaker this time, the vampire sighed. Though he had no need for breath. "This is foolish," he said quietly. But he didn't pull his hands away. Instead, he removed his coat, dark, heavy, untouched by the cold, and wrapped it carefully around the child. The fabric almost smothered the tiny body, but it shielded it from the rain. The baby settled almost instantly. Silence returned to the alley. Save for the steady rhythm of rainfall, the vampire stood cradling the small bundle, with an awkwardness that would have been comical in another life. He glanced once more into the shadows, as if expecting someone to object. No one did. "Very well," he said. The words felt like a vow. He stepped out of the alley and into the night, carrying something far more dangerous than hunger, something that could change him. Hope, and for the first time in a very long while, the darkness did not feel quite so endless. The child did not cry again. That, more than anything, unsettled him. As the vampire moved through the rain-slick streets, the city bent around him in quiet avoidance, drunks stumbling the other way, stray dogs lowering their heads, the unaware brushing past without ever quite seeing his face. It had always been this way. He was a shadow that walked. But now the shadow carried something small and warm. He adjusted the bundle in his arms. Careful, too careful for a creature who could snap bones without effort. The baby stirred, its tiny face pressing against the inside of his coat, seeking heat that he did not have. "I cannot give you what you need," he said under his breath, yet he did not stop walking. He reached the edge of the city, where the buildings leaned inward like conspirators and the street lamps flickered more out of habit than function. At the end of a narrow stairwell, half hidden behind rusted iron, stood a heavy door. He pushed it open inside. The air was still, dust lay undisturbed across wooden floors, and long curtains blocked out what little light the storm allowed. It was not a home or an apartment, it was an old castle. The vampire stepped in and closed the door behind him. The silence here was absolute. For a moment he simply stood there, listening, to the baby, to the faint flutter of its life. Still too weak. Still fading. He moved quickly now. A table was cleared with one sweep of his arm. books and objects scattering across the floor without care, and he laid the child down on the bare surface. The baby stirred, face scrunching again, breath hitching. "Stay," he said instinctively, as if the infant could obey. His eyes scanned the room, calculating. Food, warmth, protection, things he had not needed in centuries. He vanished. The door did not open. The windows did not move. One moment he was there, the next, gone. When he returned, the storm had worsened. Rain lashed against the windows in violent sheets, thunder shaking the walls. In his arms now were things stolen in haste: a wool blanket, a small bottle, a tin of powdered formula, a kettle still warm from some unattended stove miles away. He set everything down with a precision that bordered on desperation. "I remember enough," he muttered. It had been a long time. Too long! He moved awkwardly at first, hands better suited for tearing than tending. The kettle was placed over a flame he coaxed to life. The bottle was prepared with painstaking care, as though one mistake might shatter the fragile existence before him. The baby's cries grew louder, impatient, demanding, alive. "Quiet," he said, but there was no bite in it. At last he lifted the child again, supporting its head the way memory insisted he must. The bottle hovered uncertainly for a second. Then the baby latched onto it, instinct taking over. The room fell into a different kind of silence. The vampire stared. He watched the small movements, the tiny gulps, the way the child's fingers flexed weakly against the fabric of his coat. The sound of drinking, simple, ordinary, echoed louder in his mind than any heartbeat he had ever hunted. "You are persistent," he said. The baby ignored him. Minutes passed, or perhaps longer. Time had always been meaningless to him, but now it seemed to gather, to stretch, to matter in strange, uncomfortable ways. When the bottle was empty, the baby did not cry. It simply blinked up at him, eyes unfocused, searching. The vampire hesitated. Then slowly, he adjusted his grip, holding the child closer. "You should not look at me," he said softly. "You will regret it one day." The baby yawned. A small, helpless, utterly unconcerned yawn. And then it slept. Just like that, in his arms. The vampire stood there, unmoving, as if any shift might break whatever fragile spell had taken hold. He could feel it now, not warmth, not truly, but something like it, radiating from the tiny body pressed against him, a presence, a weight, a responsibility. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, something quieter began. He looked down at the sleeping child, his expression unreadable even to himself. "This changes nothing," he said. But he did not put the baby down. And in the long, endless night that followed, the vampire did something he had not done in centuries. He stayed. Morning came, though he did not see it. He felt it. A slow, creeping pressure at the edges of the world. The sun rising somewhere beyond the thick curtains, beyond the stone and dust. It pressed against him like a warning, a reminder of what he was and what he could never escape. The child stirred, a soft sound, somewhere between a sigh and a question. The vampire was still there. He had not moved. Not when the storm weakened. Not when the city began to wake. Not even when the first threads of daylight began to slip through the cracks in the walls. He looked down at the baby, its face calmer now, color returning faintly to its skin. Alive, because of him. The thought sat strangely in his mind. He had taken countless lives. That had always been simple, necessary. The world fed on itself, and he was merely part of its design. But this was the opposite. He shifted slightly, careful not to wake the child, and turned toward the far corner of the room. A heavy wardrobe stood there, its doors warped with age. He moved to it, one hand steadying the baby, the other pulling the door open. Inside, darkness. Absolute. Good. He stepped in and closed the door behind them. The world vanished. Hours passed, or maybe just moments. For him, it was the same. The child woke. This time it cried, louder, stronger than before. Not the weak protest of a life fading, but the sharp demand of one that intended to continue. The vampire opened his eyes. Even here, buried in darkness, he could see perfectly. "I know," he said quietly, his voice softer than it had any right to be. "You are hungry again." He adjusted the bundle, reaching blindly for the supplies he had brought in with him. The bottle, the formula. He worked by memory and precision, movement smoother now, less uncertain. The crying stopped as soon as the baby fed. Again that silence. Again, that strange stillness in him. "You improve," he observed. The baby, occupied, had no response. The vampire leaned back against the inside of the wardrobe, cradling the child as it ate. The enclosed space should have felt suffocating, but to him it was simply safe, necessary. To the child, it seemed, enough. "Daylight will come again," he said after a while, almost to himself. "And again, you will need more than this place, more than me." There were others in the city, humans, systems. Places where children were taken in, cared for, raised properly, away from creatures like him. He could leave the baby somewhere safe. A hospital, a church, even on a doorstep where someone kind might find it. That would be the correct choice, the rational choice. The child finished feeding and drifted back towards sleep, its small hand once again curling around one of his fingers. He went still. The grip was stronger now, intentional, trusting. The vampire stared at that tiny hand for a long time. "I am not safe," he said quietly. The baby's fingers tightened as if disagreeing. Something old and buried twisted inside him again, unfamiliar, unwelcome. He exhaled slowly. But neither was that Allie. Silence. Then carefully he adjusted the blanket around the child, ensuring it was warm, secure, protected. "I will decide tonight," he said. A promise, or perhaps a delay. The baby slept. And in the dark, with the sun burning somewhere far above, the vampire remained exactly where he was, caught between what he had always been and something he did not yet understand. Night returned like a quiet permission. The pressure lifted. The world exhaled. Somewhere above, the sun sank, and the city slipped back into shadow, the only time he had ever truly belonged. The vampire opened the wardrobe door. Darkness spilled into darkness. He stepped out, the baby still in his arms, still asleep. For a moment, he simply stood there listening. The city had changed again. Different heartbeats, different rhythms. Life moving on, unaware of the small, fragile decision hanging in the balance of a single room. "I said I would decide," he murmured. The child shifted slightly, pressing closer. He walked to the window and pulled the curtain back just enough to see the street below. People passed by, laughing, arguing, living in ways he no longer could. A woman pushed a stroller. A man carried groceries. Somewhere, a door opened, and warm light spilled into the night. Normal things, safe things, things the child deserved. His grip tightened just slightly. "It would be simple," he said. "I leave you where you will be found. You grow. You forget this ever happened." His reflection stared faintly back at him in the glass. Pale, still, unchanged by time. A monster, holding something innocent. The baby made a small sound, half awake now, eyes fluttering open. For the first time, they seemed to focus. Not perfectly, not clearly, but enough. Enough to find him. The vampire didn't look away. "You should fear me," he said. The baby blinked. Then slowly, clumsily, it reached up. Not in fear, in recognition. Its fingers brushed his face. Cold skin meeting warm life. The vampire froze. No one had touched him like that in a very, very long time. Not with curiosity, not with trust. Something inside him, something ancient and carefully buried, cracked. Just a little. He closed his eyes. "This is unwise." The baby made a soft, almost pleased sound. Unconcerned. Certain. As if the choice had already been made. The vampire exhaled slowly, then pulled the curtain shut. The street disappeared. The world, with all its logic and distance and safety, was gone again. He turned away from the window. "No," he said quietly, "not to the baby. to himself. "I will not leave you." The words settled heavily in the room. Final. Dangerous. Real. The child blinked up at him, then yawned, completely unimpressed by the weight of the decision, and nestled back into his coat. Sleep came easily. Trust came easier. The vampire stood there for a long moment, as if expecting something to challenge him. Some consequence. Some voice of reason. None came. Only the steady, growing rhythm of a tiny heartbeat. He adjusted his hold, more naturally now, less like a creature pretending and more like something learning. "You will need a name," he said after a while. The baby, of course, had no opinion. He considered this. Names had power, identity, history, things he had long abandoned. But this child would need them. "Lena," he said at last, testing the sound. Soft, simple. Human. The baby stirred slightly, as if the name had weight even now. "Lena," he repeated. The room felt different with the word in it. Less empty. He turned toward the far side of the room, where old furniture sat unused, where space could be cleared. Changed. Made into something more than a place to hide. "I do not know how to do this," he admitted. A rare thing, honesty, even to himself. "But I will learn." Outside, the city carried on unaware. Inside, a predator made a promise he did not fully understand. And for the first time in centuries, the night was no longer just something to endure. It was something to build within. The first mistake came quickly. Lena cried at the wrong time. Not in the safety of night, when the world was quiet and forgiving, but as dawn crept back toward the horizon, when the air itself seemed to tighten around him. The faint gray light began to press against the edges of the curtains. The vampire stilled. "No," he said softly, urgency threading through the word. Lena cried louder. Not weak anymore. Not fragile like before. This was the cry of something growing stronger, something that expected to be answered. The sound cut through him in a way no scream ever had. He moved fast. Curtains were drawn tighter, every crack sealed, every sliver of light chased away with unnatural precision. The room dimmed again, but the pressure of the coming day still lingered, a silent threat beneath everything. Lena did not care. She cried and cried, small face flushed, fists clenched. "I am here," he said, already reaching for the bottle. But when he offered it, she turned her head. "Refusal," he frowned. "You are hungry?" She cried harder. This was new. He adjusted his grip. Tried again. The bottle remained untouched. The cries sharpened, rising into something desperate, insistent, not a need for food. Something else. The vampire stood there, motionless for a moment, searching his memory. Fragments surfaced, distant, blurred, from a life that barely felt like his own. Not all cries meant hunger. Some meant discomfort, fear, loneliness. He looked down at her. "You are not alone." The words sounded hollow even to him. Lena's cries didn't stop. His jaw tightened slightly. "I have fed you. You are warm. You are safe." Still, she cried. A flicker of frustration passed through him. Brief, sharp, unfamiliar. Problems had always been solvable with strength, speed, certainty. This was none of those things. This required understanding. Slowly, awkwardly, he shifted her position, lifting her higher against his chest. One hand supported her head, the other rested gently, hesitantly against her back. He had seen this before. He patted her back. Too stiff at first. Too deliberate. The crying continued. He adjusted. Softer this time. Slower, a rhythm. Pat, pat, pat. The cries faltered. He froze, as if afraid the smallest change might undo it. Then, again. Pat, pat, pat. Lena's cries weakened, breaking into uneven hiccups. Her tiny body relaxed, just slightly, against him. The vampire watched this with intense focus, as if memorizing a rare and complex ritual. "Ah," he murmured. "Understanding. Not complete, but enough." He continued the motion, steady now. Measured, almost careful in a way that no one who had ever faced him would recognize. Minutes passed. Lena's breathing evened out. The room quieted. And then, a small soft sound. Not a cry, not a demand, a coo. The vampire blinked. Lena's face shifted, tension melting away into something lighter, something almost like contentment. Her tiny hand pressed weakly against his chest, as if testing that he was still there. He didn't move, didn't speak. He simply existed in that moment, holding something that trusted him completely. I see, he said at last, voice low. Not hunger, not survival. Connection? The realization settled deeper than he expected. Outside, the first true light of day brushed against the city. Inside, the darkness held, but it felt different now. Not empty, occupied, alive. Lena shifted again, eyes half open, unfocused, but searching. For something so small, he said quietly, you are very demanding. She made another soft sound, as if answering. The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but closer than he had come in a very long time. He adjusted the blanket around her once more, ensuring it was secure. You will need more than instinct, he continued, half to her, half to himself. More than what I remember. His gaze drifted briefly toward the door. The outside world. Dangerous for him, necessary for her. I will have to go out earlier, he said, closer to daylight. The thought was unpleasant. Risky, but the alternative? He looked down at Lena. Unacceptable. His hand resumed its gentle rhythm against her back. Pat, Pat, Pat. You will live, he said. Not a hope, a decision. And in the dim, quiet room, as the day pressed closer and closer against the edges of his existence, the vampire began to understand something far more terrifying than hunger. He was no longer alone in the night, and he was no longer living only for himself. The second mistake nearly killed him. It began with something small. It always did. Lena slept longer that day, curled against him in the suffocating safety of the wardrobe, her breathing soft and steady. The sound had become necessary. A quiet anchor in a world that had long since lost all rhythm for him, but when she woke, her cry was different, sharp, insistent, unfamiliar. The vampire opened his eyes instantly. You are hungry again? He asked, already reaching. The bottle was prepared faster this time, his movements now practiced, efficient. He brought it to her, certain. Lena refused. Again. Her cries rose louder than before, twisting into something strained. Her tiny body shifted restlessly, face flushed, breath uneven. The vampire stilled. This was not the same as before. He adjusted her, checked the blanket, the temperature, the bottle, everything he understood. Nothing worked. The cries only grew worse. A flicker of something cold passed through him, not fear for himself, for her. Her heartbeat, he listened closely now, was faster. Too fast, erratic in a way that sent a sharp, unfamiliar tension through his chest. No, he said quietly. Not acceptable. Not after everything. He stepped out of the wardrobe. The room was dim, but not safe. Daylight pressed harder now, bleeding faintly through the edges of his careful barriers. It brushed against his skin like a warning. He ignored it. Lena cried again, louder, weaker at the edges. He made his decision. You require more than I can give. The words felt like failure, but he did not hesitate. He wrapped her tightly, securing her against his chest, shielding her as best he could with his coat. Then he moved, faster than he ever had with her in his arms, but still careful, still controlled. The door opened. Daylight struck. It burned, not like fire, not instantly, but like something deeper, something invasive. His skin tightened, pain blooming across every exposed inch. Smoke curled faintly where the light touched him. He did not stop. The streets were alive now, people moving unaware, wrapped in their ordinary lives. No one noticed the figure moving too quickly, too smoothly, shadows clinging unnaturally to him even in the growing light. Lena's cries cut through everything. He followed the sound of stronger heartbeats, clusters of them. A place of care, of urgency. A hospital. He reached it in seconds that felt like hours. The entrance doors slid open, light flooded in. The pain intensified, sharp now, undeniable. His vision flickered at the edges. Still, he stepped inside. The air changed, sterile, bright, alive with the sounds of machines and voices and rushing footsteps. Too bright, far too bright. He kept his head down, shielding Lena as best he could. A nurse glanced his way, confusion flickering across her face, but before she could speak, he was already moving. "Help her," he said, his voice low but carrying something that made her freeze. She looked at the bundle, at the crying child. Instinct took over. "Sir, wait." He placed Lena into her arms, carefully, gently. For just a second longer than necessary, his hand lingered, brushing against the blanket, ensuring she was secure. Lena's cries faltered slightly, her small fingers grasping at the air, at nothing. The vampire pulled back. "You will live," he said again, quieter this time, almost uncertain. The nurse was already turning, calling for assistance, her voice sharp with urgency now. Others rushed forward, surrounding the child, taking her, checking her, saving her, as it should be, as it had to be. The vampire stepped back. Then another step. No one stopped him. No one truly saw him. By the time anyone might have thought to look, he was already gone. Outside, the daylight was stronger. Cruel. It tore at him now, no longer a warning but a punishment. His skin burned, darkened, cracked at the edges. Each step was slower than the last, but he kept moving, away from the hospital, away from her. The city blurred around him. Sounds dulled. The world narrowed to pain and distance and something hollow growing where that steady heartbeat had been. Gone. He reached the alley again, the same one. Empty now? Of course it was. He leaned against the wall, the strength finally leaving him. The shadows here were thin, fragile against the rising sun. It wasn't enough. His body gave in. He slid down to the ground, the light catching him fully now, burning, ending.